Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John. This is going to be a new show here on the channel. It's going to be a review roundup. We're going to call it the Let's Talk Review Show. And we'll have timestamps for all the reviews we're doing here today. We're going to do Blue Velvet on 4K Blu-ray, Matinee from Shout Factory on 4K Blu-ray. We're also going to talk about the two new movies that just got released this past week, including Axel F, the latest film in the Beverly Hills Cop franchise. We're also going to talk about MaXXXine, the end of Ty West trilogy that included X and Pearl. And we're also going to do some reviews from Kevin Kruger, who mailed me 8 Blu-rays for me to review and 1 DVD. And we're going to do about 2 of those a week here on this show. And this week we're going to be reviewing Dear Mr. Gacy on Blu-ray and Judgment Night on Blu-ray as well. And we're going to start it off with Blue Velvet. This is David Lynch's 1986 film. We're also going to talk about its Criterion 4K Blu-ray right here. This actually had been previously released on Blu-ray from the Criterion Collection, so this is just an upgrade from that. And David Lynch is one of the most popular directors of all time. At least he has a pretty big cult following ever since Eraserhead in the 1970s. Then in the 1980s, he kind of had critical acclaim with Elephant Man, and then he tried to make Dune, which was a mainstream film, which a lot of people didn't like. So he kind of went back into his little realm, and he ended up making Blue Velvet in 1986. He actually got creative control for this, so he had final say on what the movie was going to be. And it really is a David Lynch movie. It's not my favorite David Lynch movie. My favorite David Lynch movie is probably either still Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive, which are back-to-back films for him. And, I think that those are a little bit more ambitious. They're a little bit scarier. They really feel a lot more like a nightmare than Blue Velvet does. But if you've seen those movies or you've seen Twin Peaks, a lot of the same David Lynchisms happen in those movies, including you get Kyle MacLachlan, who worked with him on Dune. That's really where he first got discovered. Actually, Kyle MacLachlan says in one of the extras on the Criterion 4K, he only read 2 scripts in his lifetime up to this point. One of them was Dune, and then the other one was this. And also, this is the first time that David Lynch worked with Laura Dern. Laura Dern really became like David Lynch's muse. He uses her a lot in his stuff. She really just gets what David Lynch is going for. And the first time we ever see Laura Dern in a David Lynch movie is in this movie, and literally she walks out of the darkness into the light. I mean, it's almost like a dream, and it's really funny because David Lynch likes to make nightmares, and this is really him just tearing down, the suburban life. That's what this movie is. He wants to show all that beautiful suburban life. Well, it has some dark secrets. Everything is just hiding in the shadows. That's why Laura Dern walks out of the shadows. Kyle MacLachlan in this movie, early in the movie, he's just a regular kid. He has a regular life. He's got 2 very clean-cut parents. He's walking through a field one day and he finds an ear. A dirty, disgusting ear with ants crawling on it. He goes to one of his neighbors, who happens to be Laura Dern's father, brings him the ear. He doesn't seem too shocked about it or anything like that. He's like, oh, okay, it's definitely an ear. And then they're going to start investigating that murder and what is going on. And Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern, they kind of just get a taste for this kind of life, the dark side of suburban life. But the problem is they go too deep into it, and Kyle MacLachlan himself really gets ahead of himself too much. He goes into a lady's apartment, a club singer or a loud singer or something like that. He starts spying her in her apartment, and one night, while he's in her apartment, in her closet, who decides to show up? Because he was supposed to be warned by Laura Dern that somebody was coming up, but unfortunately, it didn't work out. This guy, Frank, played by the amazing Dennis Hopper in this movie, and arguably one of his best performances because he is unhinged. Anytime Dennis Hopper plays a villain, that's really where I think Dennis Hopper works best. Yes, he's great in movies like Easy Rider or Hoosiers, but you get him doing this, and he just gets to let loose and chew some scenery. I mean, he's got the fucking oxygen mask on, or I think it's got to have some sort of drug going through it. But the stuff he says in this movie, it's just literally just wild, and it's off the chain. It's ridiculous, the stuff that this guy is doing. He's just chewing up the scenery. He's my favorite part of Blue Velvet. I like the message of Blue Velvet more than I actually enjoy the entire film. I really enjoy the movie, but it's not one of my favorite David Lynch movies. It's one I only revisit like every few years. Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway I will watch every single year, but the rest of his movies, like even Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, despite the fact that Twin Peaks is one of my favorite shows of all time, I don't run back to Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, and I don't really run back too often to Blue Velvet. I enjoyed my time with it, but it's not one I'll probably be revisiting anytime soon. I still enjoyed it, but it's not one that I absolutely love. Now, what about this Criterion 4K Blu-ray? Yes, this is an upgrade from a previously released Blu-ray from Criterion. This is Spine number 977. David Lynch's movies, most of them have actually been released through the Criterion Collection. We obviously have some that weren't, but a lot of them have, and this is, like I was saying earlier, is one of his most famous films, so I know a lot of people are definitely really excited to grab this one on 4K Blu-ray. It's a 2-disc set, so if you were to come inside, you get everything that you previously got. So you get some reading material, everything like that. All of your extras are going to be on that Blu-ray. Only thing you're going to get on the 4K Blu-ray is going to be the film itself, and you also have it in DTS HD Master Audio 5.1, or you can watch it in a 2.0 mono track. So whichever way you choose to go. I thought the audio was honestly the best thing about this transfer. It was phenomenal, very well mixed, making great use of all of your speakers. I was very surprised at that. I honestly insulted Criterion not too long ago about their audio game, and they've really surprised me lately. They've actually knocked it out of the park with this and Bound as far as the audio goes. Absolutely phenomenal work on the audio. The extras, all of the extras are previously released, and I appreciated them. There's actually one really cool extra that's like basically just behind the scene footage with mostly music over it, but it really does give you a glimpse behind the scenes of what David Lynch was going for. You get to see him in his khaki pants, his sunglasses, you know, the distinct David Lynch look. I really appreciated, though, the interview with the guy who did all the props for this movie, talking about the ear and everything, and how he said, like, the hair that's in the ear, that's actually David Lynch's hair. He was getting a haircut, and he grabbed some hair to actually put into the ear. Thought that was, that's the stuff that fascinates me. I just love the behind-the-scenes stuff, and this one has a lot of great extras on it. Is it blow-away extras? No, but you get everything that has been previously released, and I really appreciated that, so always love all of the extras, and we get a lot of them here, again, on the Blu-ray. And when you go from the Blu-ray to the 4K Blu-ray, is it the biggest upgrade in the world? In my opinion, not really. I really thought that the 4K Blu-ray was phenomenal. You get it in Dolby Vision and HDR10. It's just not the biggest upgrade I've ever seen. Like, you get a lot more detail with that 4K Blu-ray. The colors, you know, they're still a little bit faded, which is how the movie has always looked to me, so you don't want it to be, like, too bold and vivid. You want to maintain the look of the movie. I always feel like that's what Criterion is going for, and they definitely nail that. It's just not going to be a 4K Blu-ray, in my opinion, that's going to knock your socks off in the visual department. I thought it looked great. It looked like how I always remembered Blue Velvet looking. It's just I didn't notice the biggest upgrade in the world. But overall, it is still a great 4K Blu-ray from the Criterion Collection. It's just not my favorite release from them. But if you're a fan of Blue Velvet and you have that previously released Blu-ray, it might not be worth it for you to upgrade to 4K Blu-ray, because I don't think you're going to see the biggest jump. You know, this is definitely one that you should buy right now if you want to buy it right now during the Barnes & Noble Criterion 50% off sale. This is the perfect time to grab this on 4K Blu-ray, because I don't think at full price it's totally worth it. I would honestly give Blue Velvet on 4K Blu-ray a pretty solid 8 out of 10. Nothing too special, but still a great release from the Criterion Collection. Next up on the list is going to be Matinee, and this is Shout Select number 37, and this has some of the best 4K visuals that I have seen this year. Really surprised the hell out of me. This movie came out in 1993, is directed by Joe Dante. It stars John Goodman in the leading role, playing a William Castle type. Basically, this movie is about John Goodman. He's a director. He's coming to a town in Florida, you know, very close to Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 1960s. But this movie is about going to the movies. It follows a couple of kids who enjoy going to the movies. John Goodman, that director, he's coming into town to show his new film, Mant, which is basically just a classic B horror movie. And if you know anything about William Castle is the guy who directed the original House on Haunted Hill. I believe he directed 13 Ghosts and the original ones of these. You know, a lot of his movies got remade in the late 90s and early 2000s by Dark Castle, which is basically, you know, leaning into the William Castle type. But William Castle was the type of director who had a bunch of, like, he had the flair and everything. You know, he'd put buzzers under the seats, he'd lock the doors so people couldn't get out, really trying to scare the hell out of them, because, you know, the effects in his movies are not the greatest. It was really about that movie theater experience. It really made me jealous watching this movie to see how people got so excited to go to the movies just to see this one movie that was playing there that night. This is back in the time, you know, before Jaws came out. For a lot of people who don't know this, you know, movies weren't released on the same day. They traveled the country. You know, theater exhibitors, they would come out, they would see the movie, they'd be like, okay, maybe I'll put it in my theater for a certain amount of time. That's how it kind of worked. That's why grindhouse films kind of got passed around. You know, the film itself would get dirtier and dirtier. It wasn't until Jaws came out that we had the invention of the blockbuster. We're going to release the movie in every single theater at the same exact time. Kind of the modern way we do things nowadays, but before that, this is how you had to do it. You really had to sell the theater exhibitor on what your movie is going to be and know that people are going to have a lot of fun watching that movie, and that's what this movie is all about. John Goodman is so charismatic in this movie. He is the best part of the film. It's not my favorite movie I've ever seen from Joe Dante, but man, it is heartwarming. It's definitely the kind of movie you would watch in a matinee, to be honest with you guys. 10, 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. this is the perfect movie. You know, it's very lighthearted. It's got a great Jerry Goldsmith score in it. It feels like an early 1990s movie. This is the kind of movie, if I would have saw when I was a kid, I would have absolutely loved it. But the movies that I think of Joe Dante for, you know, the two Gremlins movies, Small Soldiers, like, these are the movies that I grew up with Joe Dante with. This is one, unfortunately, that somehow passed me by. The Burbs is another one that I love. And this one will go into my Joe Dante rotation. It's still not one of my favorite Joe Dante movies, but this 4K Blu-ray, the visuals are, like I was just saying, they are absolutely stunning. And you know what else they gave us? A brand new Dolby Atmos track, and a really, really, really good one. Very well mixed. There's like an action sequence towards the end of this movie, and I just couldn't believe how well it was making great use of all of my speakers. An awesome Dolby Atmos track. You also get a second disc included in this, and of course, just like most 4K Blu-ray releases, you will have all of your extras on that second Blu-ray disc. And when you go from that Blu-ray to the 4K Blu-ray, again, Dolby Vision, HDR10, looks absolutely gorgeous. Some of the best visuals of 2024 are on this Shout Select 4K Blu-ray disc. And you combine that with the great audio, the great extras, which are mostly interviews, but still, we get so many great extras. I would have liked a real making of documentary. There's like an archival one, which is really just like a promotional one. I would have loved a real making of documentary, but I appreciate them getting all of these interviews. I would have loved one with John Goodman, because I don't know how he still feels about this movie, but he gives a phenomenal performance in it. Would have liked more of his thoughts with this one. You get a great slipcover on this. This is one, though, maybe you wait for the Shocktober sale in October, because I don't know if this is one that you're going to be absolutely blown away by the film, but these 4K visuals definitely deserve to be seen. I just think it's a beautiful looking film, and it really is for the film fan out there. It really is showing love for people who love movies. I wish I liked this one just a little bit more than I did, but I still really enjoyed my time with it, and this 4K Blu-ray is definitely worth your money. You know, maybe wait for a sale just depending on how you feel about the film, but if you've seen Matinee and you love Matinee, you really can't go wrong with this 4K Blu-ray, and I would give the 4K Blu-ray itself a really solid 9 out of 10. Definitely worth your time and money. Alright, well now let's dive into the two new movie reviews that came out this week. We'll start it off with the one that probably people are most excited for because you can watch it on Netflix right now, and that is Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. I really wish they would have called it just Beverly Hills Cop 4, but I assume they called it Beverly Hills Cop Axel F because that's the name of the original Beverly Hills Cop theme song. And one funny thing about this movie, and we're talking about MaXXXine, is Kevin Bacon pops up in both of these movies pretty much playing a very stereotypical character, very cliched character, but because it's Kevin Bacon in both movies, he just goes for it. I think Kevin Bacon, after watching these two movies, I think the guy truly loves to be an actor. I saw in an interview that he said that doing Beverly Hills Cop 4 was like a bucket list thing for him. You know, to team up with Eddie Murphy. This is the first time they ever acted together, which is pretty surprising because they've pretty much been working about the same amount of time. They're around the same age. Kevin Bacon, you know, he's always seemed like the kind of actor who just loves acting. So I'm not too surprised that he seemed like he was having a blast in both of these movies. He plays a villainous character in Beverly Hills Cop Axel F., bringing back Eddie Murphy into the title role. This one was directed by Mark Malloy in his directorial debut. Every single Beverly Hills Cop movie has been directed by somebody different. You know, you get Martin Brest with the first movie. The second one was directed by Tony Scott, the worst one, and it's still the worst one. Beverly Hills Cop 3 was directed by John Landis. Now you get Mark Malloy with this movie. And this movie brings back, you know, not just Eddie Murphy. We bring back Judge Reinhold. We bring back John Ashton. We even bring back Paul Reiser, who, you know, has a small part in Beverly Hills Cop 1, and then you kind of expand on his role a lot more in Beverly Hills Cop 2, but seeing him back here, you know, he also pops up in Stranger Things. I thought all of that was fun. It's a legacy sequel. It has all the legacy sequel cliches you would expect, but it was a pretty good movie. You know, the only thing with this is it follows a similar plot to how, you know, movies like Top Gun Maverick follow, where, you know, he's got an estranged relationship with, in this case, it's his daughter in Top Gun Maverick. It's with Goose's son. You know, he's got this relationship that, you know, obviously we have to fix it. That's the big part of this movie. You know how that ends up at the very end of this movie, of course. You know, he's having a struggling relationship with his daughter. I think we all know how that ends. But we also have some new characters like Kevin Bacon. We also get Joseph Gordon-Levitt popping up in this movie. Haven't seen too much of him. He looked like he was having a good time as well. I really just think that the best part of this movie was Eddie Murphy doing Axel Foley again. It didn't really ruin anything about Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2. It doesn't live up to Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2, but this is kind of what I expected from a legacy sequel. This is the definition of it's just fine. It's not one I'm going to run back to. It feels like a modern film, which I think also kind of hurts the movie in a way, because one thing about Beverly Hills Cop, it feels very much like a 1980s movie. Unfortunately, this still does feel like a 2024 movie with Axel Foley in it. I personally wish this movie didn't exist, but it does exist. I watched it. I had a good time, but it's not one I'm going to run back to. So I can definitely recommend the movie because it's still 10 times better than Beverly Hills Cop 3. It's just one that I feel like you'll enjoy. It's not one you're going to run back to. So I'll rate Beverly Hills Cop Axel F a pretty solid 7.5 out of 10. Nothing special, but also it is harmless. And then one of my most anticipated movies this year was MaXXXine. This is the third film in Ty West's horror trilogy that started with X, then we got Pearl, and now we have MaXXXine. All of these movies have starred Mia Goth in different roles. This time it's MaXXXine, who we last saw in the movie X, coming back for this movie. But it does have some great juxtapositions with the movie Pearl. Pearl is one of my favorite movies of 2022. I might have even put it at number 1 on the list here on the channel, but Babylon has since passed Pearl, even though I absolutely love Pearl. And what stands out in that movie is definitely Ty West's direction and Mia Goth. And Mia Goth in MaXXXine is phenomenal. She gives another great performance, and you guys know how much I love the 1980s. Well, this movie was just, for me, it's eating good in the neighborhood. It checked a lot of boxes. We're in 1980s Hollywood. Ty West clearly got the message of, hey, let's make sure this movie looks like 1980s Los Angeles. I hate it when movies look like they're cosplaying as the 1980s. No, this actually set the tone of what a 1980s film felt like, and I love it for it. But the real standout is Mia Goth, yet again, giving another phenomenal performance. Now, she doesn't get that great monologue like she does in Pearl. There is a great monologue in a very similar scene, but it's from a different perspective, I'll say. I don't want to spoil too much about this movie because this movie is very much a mystery thriller horror film. The mystery part of it, like, I felt like they were really trying to set us up to make it seem like the person who was doing the killing in this movie was very obvious. You need to know a little bit about the Night Stalker, who was a big killer in the 1980s in Los Angeles. That's kind of taking place in the backdrop of this movie. They're trying to, play with your expectations with that. There's also so many homages to classic 1980s horror films, including the Psycho franchise. I will not say more than that because I have a friend of mine, David, aka Shamrock Balls, who loves the entire Psycho franchise, who probably would have jumped out of his seat if he would have saw one of the scenes in this movie. Again, I don't want to spoil it because I got super excited for that stuff while watching this movie just because I love 1980s horror. And clearly Ty West does, but Ty West is also clearly a big fan of Alfred Hitchcock, and this is kind of like his homage to like those types of horror movies. And I just loved it for it. This movie looked great. It had great needle drops of 1980s song. It also flew by like a 1980s well-paced movie. So I love this movie. I really have no complaints about it. It's almost a flawless film for me. It is my favorite film of 2024. Is it as good as Pearl? That's really the question I've been asking myself since I saw this movie 2 days ago, and it's really tough. I'm going to have to wait and watch X, Pearl, and MaXXXine back to back to back, and from what I understand, MaXXXine is going to be coming out on 4K Blu-ray, which is frustrating because X and Pearl are 4K Blu-rays you would have to import, and I was hoping, and I've been holding out for this, that we would get X, Pearl, and MaXXXine like in a triple pack from A24 with beautiful 4K Blu-rays, which still might come, but I'm not going to be able to wait that long. I'm going to have to get X, Pearl, and then MaXXXine on 4K Blu-ray and watch them back to back to back because I just had so much fun in the theater watching this movie. It's such a well-made movie. Ty West does everything in it. He writes, produces, he even edits his own film. He obviously directed. Mia Goth also produced this film. It's also a really funny movie. There's some really funny moments in it. Obviously, it's very dark humor because of the subject matter, but you got to see this movie just for Mia Goth. Even if this isn't your type of movie, if you want to see acting with a capital A, you definitely have to check out MaXXXine. I would definitely give MaXXXine a really high score of 9.5 out of 10. It's really hard for me to find a flaw in this movie, so I just had a great time with MaXXXine, and I can highly recommend you guys check this one out. Try and see it in a movie theater if you can. Unfortunately, by me, they're only playing it in like the smaller theaters. Even if you go to like AMC, they put it in the theater with only about 40 seats, which is a little disappointing, but of course, it's an R-rated horror film from, I guess probably not one of the most popular directors of all time, and we also know how the Academy looks at like Mia Goth because she would have got an Academy Award nomination for her performance in Pearl had it not been a horror film, and that's one thing that's always bothered me because seriously, these are very, very well-made movies. All three of them, X, Pearl, and now MaXXXine, all three of them are so well-made. Check out MaXXXine. If you haven't seen X and Pearl, I can also highly recommend those. All right, now we're going to talk about Dear Mr. Gacy and Judgement Night. Judgement Night came out in 1993, and Judgement Night is directed by Stephen Hopkins. It follows around a group of friends played by Emilio Estevez, who plays Frank in this movie, his buddy Jeremy Piven, his best friend Cuban Gooding Jr., and then the fourth friend ends up bowing out, and then Frank's brother, played by Stephen Dorff in this movie, who's named John, ends up showing up, and they're going to be the four guys. They get in an RV, they're heading to a boxing match, and, you know, they're on their way there, they're drinking a little bit, and they think they hit somebody, but unfortunately, they didn't, is how I would put it, because unfortunately, this guy got shot before he got hit. They bring him in the vehicle, and then it turns out the people who did the shooting, led by Dennis Leary, and one of the guys in his gang is actually played by Everlast, which I thought was hysterical. I didn't even know that guy acted.
Yeah, ass like John McEnroe. If your girl steps up, I'm smacking the hoe. And then you really might know what it's like.
So seeing him pop up, and I love Dennis Leary. Dennis Leary, you know, he's always been kind of like my guy. I always thought he was really funny. I love the show Rescue Me. And this is Dennis Leary in the early 1990s when he's the stand-up comedian. And you can see that this is kind of like a vehicle for him to literally like let him spread his wings, because he gets like these monologues. You know, Dennis Leary at the time, he was like fast talking, and he doesn't shut the fuck up in this movie, which I loved it. I thought that was really funny. But you get Jeremy Piven in this movie doing Jeremy Piven things. You know, this is him when he's like still losing the hair before, I guess he got hair plugs or whatever, because somehow once Entourage comes around, the guy's got a full head of hair again, but in the 90s, he's balding throughout the entire time. And he always plays similar characters, kind of like a weasel, always trying to like snake his way out of things. Emilio Estevez in this movie, he's the strong guy, but he's not as strong as his buddy Cuban Gooding Jr. So the four of them, when Dennis Leary finds out that this guy was with them, he's like, we got to eliminate the witnesses. So it almost becomes like a Warriors type situation where they got to get across Chicago. You know, this is the kind of movie that could easily be solved with a cell phone, but it's 1993, so they don't have a cell phone, so, you know, they have to find a payphone if there are any. But the only way for them to escape is essentially get across the city without getting killed by these guys. And that's really what this movie is about. And overall, I enjoyed this movie. I actually thought it was a pretty good film. Alan Silvestri did the score for this one, which is pretty surprising. I just thought it had kind of, it's actually a very well-made movie. It's edited great, it's shot great, there's a lot of beautiful looking shots in this movie. It takes place mostly at night, so it just looks great. That's why I like how they call it Judgment Night. It's just one night following these characters around and everything that they have to go through. Of course, the cast is great. Everybody's giving really good performances. There's times where guys like Dennis Leary are overacting, but I thought that kind of benefited the film. Is it the greatest movie I've ever seen? No, you've probably seen this movie before. It follows a very, you know, cliche plot because it has those extra factors. It's got a good soundtrack, it's got a good score, and it's got some really good performances in it. It kind of does help it to stand out, but in the early 1990s, you kind of got a lot of these types of movies. You know, even throughout the entire 1990s, this is the kind of movie you have seen before, this type of thriller. I really enjoyed it. It's the kind of movie you watch every couple of years, you know, maybe throw it on like a Saturday or Sunday morning. Actually, this is the kind of movie you probably should watch at night because it takes place at night. You know, it's got a lot of great drama in it. It's one that might not stick with you that much, but I think you'll really enjoy your time with it. And actually, this Warner Archive Blu-ray was very well done. It's got a DTS HD Master Audio 5.1 on it, and I was really surprised about that. And the director who directed this also directed the second best Nightmare on Elm Street movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. So he knows how to direct the movie. I think he did a pretty good job with this film. This Warner Brothers Archive Blu-ray really surprised me with how well that DTS HD Master Audio was, and it's honestly a really, really good Blu-ray. It looks great. This is actually the kind of Blu-ray that did put some time into. Now, the thing is as an extras junkie, there are no extras when it comes to this, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but this does kind of feel like, hey, let's get the movie out there for the fans, and Kevin Kruger really wanted me to review this one, and I really appreciated it. Thank you, buddy. This was a really good Blu-ray I can recommend to you guys. The film itself was really enjoyable, so how would I rate the movie on a score of 1 to 10? I would give this one a solid 7.5 out of 10. And then last, and certainly not least, is Dear Mr. Gacy. And I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but it's directed by Sylvester Ritovazowski. I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I haven't seen him direct really anything else, and this obviously is about John Wayne Gacy, the notorious serial killer who's most famous obviously for dressing like a clown. I believe he was convicted for 33 murders. All of the bodies were men found underneath his house, so a lot of what this movie is dealing with the fact that the man was a homosexual. John Wayne Gacy, he's on death row. He's pretty much going to die pretty soon. It's actually based on a true story. It's based on the book by Jason Moss, and when you look into Jason Moss's life, it is actually very sad because Jason Moss committed suicide in 2006 before this movie came out, before the rights to that book were actually sold off. He was excited about the movie being made, but apparently he really suffered with depression, which is really sad, and he never actually got to see this movie about what he did. And what he did was, John Wayne Gacy wasn't the only person he did this to, but he tried to communicate with serial killers and almost try and get the perspective of the victim. So that's what Jesse Moss in this movie, who plays the other main character, while William Forsythe, who a lot of people might remember from like Raising Arizona, or I always think of him from Blue Streak. He's a phenomenal actor in his own right, and this is probably his best performance because, again, he does a great job. He's the standout in this movie, and it makes you think that William Forsythe really didn't get enough recognition for the work he did, because he does such a good job in this movie as John Wayne Gacy. He really is the star. It's really him and Jesse Moss's movie, and Jesse Moss, he's got to write this paper for college. This is his real thesis. His teacher tells him, or his professor tells him that, if your serial killers are getting really cliche and played out, you're really going to have to find something to stand out. That's why he gets the idea to try and do it from the victim's perspective. So he's trying to become essentially a victim of John Wayne Gacy, and this really starts to take a toll on his mind. And that's essentially what this movie is about, is how it is affecting him, what John Wayne Gacy is doing to him. Now, he did this not just to John Wayne Gacy, but he was the closest to John Wayne Gacy. He also did it with 4 other serial killers, from what I was able to find out, which is just really fascinating, and it is a great idea. And the movie itself, it's pretty good. It's not the best shot movie, and a lot of that might have to do with the Blu-ray, which isn't the best looking Blu-ray, but the Blu-ray does have 1 extra on it, so I did appreciate that. Thought the sound was pretty good. It's a Dolby True HD 5.1. It's a very gritty looking movie, I think intentionally, and the acting from Jesse Moss isn't as good as William Forsythe's acting, but I was very fascinated by this movie, and to find out that it's a true story, that makes it even more like just harrowing. It's really tough when you're watching a movie with a serial killer, and we were all very fascinated by serial killers and how they could do this. And this movie was no different. I was just fascinated by it. Now, some of the acting, other than William Forsythe, was questionable. Like the professor, like his acting was not that great. But obviously, it's kind of a showpiece for these 2 lead actors, William Forsythe and Jesse Moss. I just think that William Forsythe does give a great performance in this movie. And I think that without his performance in this movie would be a little bit more forgettable, because, everyone else around him isn't doing as good of a job. But the story and plot is interesting enough, and then knowing that's a true story, that I could definitely recommend this movie, especially to see William Forsythe's performance in it. So how would I rate this film on a score of 1 to 10? Well, I would give Dear Mr. Gacy a pretty solid 8 out of 10. I think that one is definitely worth your time as well, especially if you're fascinated with John Wayne Gacy and knowing that this is a true story. I think it is pretty interesting, and the Blu-ray is pretty decent. It's not the greatest Blu-ray I've ever seen, but for a movie like this, I do think it is pretty decent. But anyway, guys, let me know what you thought of the first episode of the Let's Talk review show. Do you guys want to see me do this each and every single week? Right now, that's my plan, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Let me know if there's anything I need to adjust. It's the first time we've done it like this. Please let me know in the comment section before. I can't change anything if I don't know if anything was that bad. And if you guys did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that share button, subscribe to the channel if you could. We also have channel memberships. We have a Friends of the Channel tier. We have a Producers tier where you're going to find Jason Martin, Mr. Smelly Potato, and John Doe Juggalo. And we also have a Directors tier where you're going to find Frank from Frank's Media and Reviews. Make sure you guys subscribe to John Doe Juggalo's YouTube channel and Frank's YouTube channel. I promise you guys will not regret it. But if you got no money to throw our way, don't you worry about it at all. All we hope is that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure you guys get out in those streets and tell your friends about us. And then we'll be seeing you around.